A nerve-wracking day for founder Chris Brikey, trying to work out how his startup is affected by the government's budget backdown on changes to capital gains tax.
The problem that they have is they're trying to sort of cherry pick who meets the criteria of being innovative in our economy. I think in reading these rules, every plumber and hairdresser will try and work out how they can become eligible for these carve-outs.
Labor has been workshopping potential changes with the startup sector.
Startups were the biggest impacted group because their cost bases are so low. It means that they'd be paying effectively 47 cents or pretty close to it. So they're trying to address that.
Well, this is genuine reform, and genuine reform is often difficult.
The details of the carve-out for startups is still being worked through, but an innovative business, CGT concession, is being proposed. The 50% tax discount will be applied to capital gains on shares held by founders, employees, early investors and venture capital partners. Companies, foreign investors and super funds will be excluded. The stocks must be issued from July next year by an unlisted, independent, innovative startup that has an annual turnover of less than $50 million and been going for less than 10 years. The government is considering expanding this to 15 years for biotechs. Shares must be held for at least 5 years, and the 50% discount is capped at lifetime gains of $10 million per person. The company must be focused on one or more new innovations, have high growth potential, be able to scale up and appeal to a broad market while retaining a competitive edge.
We do consider there to be a special case for businesses with low or no startup costs, and that necessitates this different treatment in the tax system.
Chris Brikey worries he's been overlooked.
Because we would be over 10 years old on 30 June 2027, our shares wouldn't be eligible, even though I would say we're very much an innovative business, driving growth and productivity and jobs in our economy.
For smaller businesses, the government will increase the turnover threshold from $2 million to $10 million for those claiming a 50% reduction on gains of active assets.
The government today has made a very important and a very welcome step in the right direction in announcing that they will increase those thresholds, but only for one of the small business CGT concessions. So we will continue to advocate for them to apply it across all four.
This now means that every one of the 2.7 million active small businesses in this country will have access to generous CGT concessions, and 98% of all active businesses will be eligible for these concessions.
Well, the government's now basically wrapped up talking with small businesses on the proposed CGT changes. It's now focused on the final details for the carve-outs planned for startups, with conversations to take place over the next few weeks. The opposition says it'll oppose all the changes in the Senate.
We will axe Labor's toxic taxes if they get through the Parliament, and that will be the position we take to the next election.
With One Nation also opposed to the changes, it's setting up a three-way electoral battleground with small businesses front and centre.
For his views on the government's $475 million reversal on capital gains tax and trusts, I spoke to independent economist Saul Eslake. Saul Eslake, welcome to The Business.
Thank you for having me.
Saul Eslake, the government is revising a fraction of its $8.1 billion budget tax reform package. Has the government caved to a potent, loud campaign here?
I don't think they have, although I have no inside knowledge. The budget papers made clear, and the government has since made clear, that they were always going to consult particularly with the startup community about the special concerns that indexation of the cost base raised for them. And I think they've done that in the announcement that was made today. The other changes are, for the most part, relatively small compared with the size of the overall package. And it's not unusual for governments to make compromises, as, for example, the Howard government did with the breadth of the GST when it was introduced in 2000 in order to get legislation accepted by the Parliament.
So do you think this is an economic decision or a political one?
Oh, I think there's always politics in any decision that government makes, even if it's primarily about economic policy, and this wouldn't be any exception. The government's obviously taken a bit of political flack for breaking promises and for not consulting beforehand in the way that the Hawke Keating and Howard Costello governments did during their episodes of big tax reform, and they've obviously made some calculations as to how much political capital they can afford to or willing to burn. But I think for the most part, from an economic policy perspective, the changes they've made and announced today are sensible ones.
In terms of business reaction, the chief executive of ACCI, Andrew McKellar, says this is a really rushed patch-up job. What do you think?
Well, I think the changes that are designed to accommodate the concerns of startups were ones that business groups and others, including me, had urged the government to make. And the budget papers and subsequent comments by the Prime Minister and the Treasurer had suggested that something like this was almost always on the table. So I don't see it as a major backdown in response to concerted pressure from business groups or anyone else. I think it's a sensible response to legitimate concerns that have been raised, as is the government's response, for example, to the concerns that have been raised about the impact that some of the detail of the changes to capital gains tax might have had on donations to charity. I wouldn't necessarily say the same thing about the big increase in the indexation provision for the maximum turnover for small business exemptions from capital gains. I think that's a regrettable measure, but I understand the politics behind it.
The campaign against the CGT changes, particularly for startups, was predicated on the idea that there'd be a flight of capital offshore. Do you think as a result of the announcement today, risk-taking behaviour is back on the table?
Well, I'm not sure that it was ever going to be taken off. I think that was a threat that was made by some who didn't like the idea that they might have to pay a bit more tax than they would have otherwise. And I'd made the point, and I'd do it again, that while some people might think that they'd want to go to the United States or the United Kingdom because their capital gains tax regimes are more favourable to investors than the Australian one will be, anyone who's contemplating doing that would also need to take into account, for example, that both of those countries impose death duties or inheritance taxes, which Australia still doesn't. And there are other things that anyone wanting to locate in, say, Los Angeles or San Francisco or in New York would have to contemplate that the top marginal rate in those jurisdictions, when you include state and local taxes, is actually higher than it is in Australia, albeit that it cuts in at a higher income threshold. So just simply to say that because the capital gains tax regime isn't going to be as friendly as it used to be, I'm going to go off to some other jurisdiction, was, I think, an exaggerated threat, and I think the government's response to it has been appropriate.
Saul Eslake, thank you so much.
That's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.